Hello everyone, welcome to this course in which we will be performing full stack CRUD operations in Next.js Server Actions, React, Typescript, TailwindCSS, Prisma, and Postgresdb on Neon. This course is beginner friendly but will also be covering advanced concepts such as input field validation using Zod and React hook form. We will be creating reusable React components from scratch in a step-by-step manner. If I try to submit this form, you'll notice that we have a strong validation that is going on in this particular input field, and we'll be making use of React hook form and Zod to validate the input field. The input field is easily reusable. We can easily reuse it for email, for password, and any other input that we would like. And we will be able to create a post. We will be able to read the post. We will be able to update a post, and also we will be able to delete a post. And for all those actions, we will not be making a call to an API, but rather we will be making a call to a Next.js server action that will communicate with the database. So let's see the demo of this application. All we will do right here is to create a post. So I'll say React, and once I type something, you'll see that the error automatically disappears, which is really cool. And then when I click submit, it's submitting, post created, and we are able to see it on the UI. We are able to click the edit icon here and we can update the post. So I can say React.js and I hit submit. Once it's submitted, it crosses the model and we can see the updated post. If I refresh, you'll notice that all this data is saved on our Postgres database, which will be hosted on Neon. And we can go ahead and delete a post. So if I click on delete, the post will be deleted. So this is a very simple application, but you'll get to learn a lot of stuff. First of all, I'll take you through Next.js. I'll take you through React, and you learn how to create reusable components. And also you'll learn about Next.js server actions. Again, instead of using APIs, we'll be making use of Next.js server action to communicate to our database. This course is sponsored by Neon, and Neon is a serverless Postgres platform designed to help you build reliable and scalable applications faster. And another cool thing with Neon is that you can branch your data just like you do with your code. And it's easy to get started with Neon because they offer a generous free tier. You can use the free tier to work on an application. Once you're happy with it, you go ahead and purchase the premium package, the launch or the scale package for more storage and even more features. And in this video, we will be making use of Postgres database, which we will create on Neon, and you'll see how easy it is to connect the Postgres database to our application. So thanks to Neon for supporting this particular course. In this episode, we'll start by creating our Next.js application, and Next.js is simply a React framework for building full-stack web application. We use React components to build the user interface and Next.js for additional features and optimizations. So these additional features include things like routing, and also we can create APIs with Next.js. We have server-side rendering and optimizations such as image optimizations, fonts, code splitting, and so much more. So if you want to create a full stack application using React, Next.js is one of the best options that you can use because it makes things easier and it has cool optimizations. To get started with Next.js, first of all, you'll need to have Node.js 18 or later. So if you visit nodejs.org and go to download, here you can download your Node.js. I think pre-built installer is much easier. I would use this one in my case. So you just download Node version 20 or the one that is latest by the time you are watching this video. And once you do that, you'll be ready to move on. Now, to check the version of Node that you are using, on Windows, you can open a folder like I have done right here, and then on the path here you can type cmd and hit enter, and that will open the command line terminal. And on Mac, I'm not sure how you open the terminal, but just make sure you open the terminal, and then right here you just say node and then space -v, hit enter, and that will show the version of node that you are using. So make sure this version is greater than the one that is mentioned right here. It's greater than 18.7, or in future they might like also improve this one, so make sure it's greater than what is mentioned on the documentation. Another thing is that if you don't get a version here, that means that you don't have Node.js installed in your machine, and you need to go to nodejs.org and download Node.js. Now once you do that, the next step is to just run this particular command to create a Next.js application, and we'll use at latest here for the latest Next.js version. So I'll copy this particular command and I'll go back to my terminal which I had opened, and I'll paste it here. And I want to create my Next.js application in the YouTube folder. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. Now here we have some questions. What is your project named? So let's give a name to our project, and I'll say CRUD -in Next.js, just like that, and I'll hit enter. And then would you like to use Typescript? I'll go ahead and say yes. Would you like to use ESLint? And I'll go ahead and say yes. Would you like to use TailwindCSS? I'll say yes. Would you like to use SRC directory? Normally I don't use it. You can either use it or not, so I'll go ahead and say no. That was the default actually. Would you like to use app router? So this is the latest version of Next.js. We have app router and we have the pages router. So I'll go ahead and say yes to use the app router. Would you like to customize the default import alias? And I'll say yes. So this is where the import is shortened if the path is too long by making use of it. So you'll see an example of that in case we have such a situation. So I'll go ahead and say yes. What import alias would you like to configure? I'll go ahead with the default. I'll hit enter. And this will just go ahead and create our Next.js application. So I'll wait for this one to complete. Now our application have been created, so we need to go inside our folder, which is this CRUD in Next.js. So right here I'll say cd and I'll say CRUD -in Next.js and hit enter. And once I do that, I'll open this with my favorite code editor, which is Visual Studio Code. So to do that, I'll say code space and a period and hit enter. And that will open our application on Visual Studio Code. Let me bring this right here, and here is our application. You can close the terminal now, and we'll now focus on this particular window, which is our Visual Studio Code. And as you can see, all these files were generated, and we are making use of the app router. Now in the next episode, let's explore what we have right here. So we successfully created a Next.js application. How do we run this application? So I'll pop the Visual Studio terminal. If I come here, I can create a new terminal, which will open at the bottom here. We use npm run dev. So this is the command that we'll use to run our Next.js application. It will start at localhost 3000. I'll hit Control and click this link. So this is our application currently. This particular page, if you want to find it, you can come to app, then you go to page.tsx, and right here you'll see that is what we already have, like a template. And this page.tsx is our homepage. So if you want to add something on the homepage, this is where you would come. Okay, I'll highlight main, go all the way down to main, and I'll move it, and then right here I'll have just a div, and then we had this image component imported from Next image. So this component is already created by Next.js to optimize images, but we don't need an image right now. So I'll go ahead and remove that. And then right here, we can just say app, and I go ahead and save. Now, if we check our app here on the browser, let me refresh. It should have auto refreshed. I don't know why it didn't, but you'll see now we have app. Okay, very nice. Now let's check other parts of the application. At app, we have this layout, and this layout.tsx is like the beginning of our application. So as you can see right here, we have the HTML tag and the body tag, and then these children will be this page right here, okay, and any other pages that we will create. So here we are exporting a metadata object, and this metadata is where we include things like title, description, and here you can also add the favicon. The favicon is the icon that appears at the top of the page right here at the title. So if you want a favicon, this is where you'll also add one. So I will remove this title and I'll say posts, and once I save, you'll notice that is the title that changes at the top here, posts. Very nice. Also right here, you can change description to create post. And if you check the page description, if you inspect right here and you check the elements at the head, you check for the description, we have title as posts, and then meta description you'll see is create posts. So this is where you can change those. Another thing that I told you, you can add an icon here. So I'll say icons will be an icon, and it will be available at stroke. Then I can say logo.png. So I currently don't have these. So what I will do is that I'll add a logo at public folder. So here we have these logo.png, and since I don't have a logo ready for this particular application, I grabbed the neon logo since they supported this particular course, and that is what I'll use to show you how you can add a favicon. So here, once you say icons and you say icon is at logo.png and I go ahead and save, you'll notice that that will grab the logo from the public folder, and then it will make use of it here. But right here we have this favicon.icon which is already being used. So if I remove this one, I'll go ahead and delete that one, and I hit a refresh here, you'll see that our logo or our favicon is being applied at the top there. So if you have a special logo that you need to use, you can just use it right here, add it at public folder. Then once you do that, you come to metadata and you add it like that. Okay. Now this is our root layout, meaning that this is the beginning of our application. And as I told you, we are passing children, and children will represent the various pages. This is the first page, but if you want to create other pages, what you need to do is to create a folder first and then add a page in there. So right here at app, if I add a folder and say about, and then in about we add a page, so I'll say page.tsx, I hit enter, then I say stateless functional component. So this is an extension that I am using, a VS Code extension, to create a functional component called simple React snippets. So here I can say about, and right here we can return something, a div, and I'll say about. So this is a new page that we have created, and how we access that page now is by going to stroke about. So right here, if I happen to go to stroke about and I hit enter, you'll notice that it loads this particular div about, and that is our about page. So in this course, we'll only have one page, that is the home page. We are focusing only on the CRUD operations. I just wanted to show you how you can create extra pages. So I'll go ahead and delete that particular folder. The next thing that I would like to show you, it's still at our layout. We have a way of adding fonts. We just import a font from Next Font Google. So Next.js already optimizes fonts for us, and right here they are making use of inter and this is how they are doing it. And then they are adding a class name, inter.className, just like this. Let's try to bring in a different font. I don't want inter, but I want a font called Poppins. So here I'll say Poppins, and then right here we will call this Poppins as a function. So I'll say Poppins. Right here we'll pass subsets, and another thing that we will add is the weights. So right here we'll add weights, and it will be an array. We need 400, and right here I'll say comma and 700. Here I'll say this is Poppins. Now we have this object which have a property called class name, and we can call it like this, Poppins.className. And now our font will change from inter to Poppins. So right here, let me just remove that about and hit enter, and this font now is Poppins instead of inter. So next, let's create a container component for our application. In this episode, we are going to create a container component. We have TailwindCSS already configured, and if you go to grubos.css right here, you'll see that we already have these utils. And then we have these other styles that were being applied for our template, and as you can see, it's already in a dark mode. So I don't want all this. I'll only remain with our Tailwind configuration right here. So I remove all that, and I'll go ahead and save, and you'll notice that now all the styles are gone, and we'll be starting these in a fresh way using TailwindCSS. So right here, I'll minimize everything, and I'll go ahead and I'll add a new folder, not in apps, but at the root. So minimize everything, then click out here to make sure that it's at the root of our application, and I'll say components. Inside components, I'll go ahead and add a new folder. I'll call this one layout. In this layout, this is where you can add things like the navbar, the footer, the container, something to do with the layout. In this case, we'll only be adding the container component. So right here, I'll say container.tsx. And as you can note that for folders, I'm starting with small letters. For this component, we start with a capital letter. I'll go ahead and say stateless functional component. And again, I am using a VS Code extension called Simple React Snippets. And right here, I'll say this is a container, and we go ahead and have a div. And for this div, it will be accepting children. So the children will be the various React elements. And right here, we'll receive children as plops. So I'll say children. And we need to add a type for this using Typescript. So right here, I'll add a full colon, and I'll say children will be of type React.React node, just like that. And then we pass this children right here inside this div. So inside this div, I'll go ahead and I'll say children. We'll add some styles using TailwindCSS. So I'll just say class name, and then right here, I'll set a max -width let's use a custom value of 1920px. So we have to add these square brackets for a custom value. Then I'll hit space, and I'll say width -full. So as you can see, we are getting these nice suggestions for our class name for TailwindCSS, and that is because I am using an extension. Let me show you some extensions that I am using so that it's even easier for you to follow. We have these simple React snippets. That is what I use to create the component. Then for those nice IntelliSense, I am using TailwindCSS IntelliSense. And then for my theme, I am using Moonlight theme and Prettier as a code formatter. And also we have these pretty TypeScript errors, which shows some nice TypeScript errors if we have some. So right here with full, then I'll have MX, and I'll say auto. So this is margin along the x-axis. So we say MX auto so that we can center this particular container. So right here, I'll set padding along the x-axis to be 4 and padding along the y-axis to be 4. So this is for small screens by default. For a larger screen, I'll say Excel and full colon, and I'll change the padding along the x-axis to be 20. So I'll go ahead and save. We'll make use of this particular component inside our page. So I'll go to app, then page, then right here, instead of having this div, we'll be having a container. So right here, I'll just say container, and I make sure that that comes from our components layout container. And as you can see, we had configured this at alias to shorten the path. Now, once we save and I expand these, you'll notice that this should be inside a container now. So now the next thing that we'll work on is to create a reusable input component. In this episode, we will work on our posts form, and when working on the form, this is where we will make use of React hook form, and also we'll validate the form by making use of Zod. We'll also work on a function called cn function, and this will help us to conditionally render our TailwindCSS styles. So this cn function will make use of two libraries, Tailwind merge and a library called CLSX. Let's install these various libraries. If you have your application running, you can make use of Ctrl+C to stop the server, or you can just add a new terminal by clicking plus right here if you are making use of Visual Studio Code. I'll say npm I, and I will install React-hook-form. I will go ahead and install Zod. I will install Tailwind-merge. I will install CLSX. So hit enter to install those libraries. As this installs, I'll come to the root of the application and I'll add a new folder. We'll call this folder schemas. We will create a schema for our form by making use of Zod, and I'll say post schema.ts. In here, we will bring in our Zod library, and I'll say import everything as Z from Zod. And right here, we'll export our post schema just like this. I'll say const post schema, and right here, I'll set this to be equal to z.object, and here we can define the various properties that we will need in our form. Our form only have one input field, which will be a title. So I'll say title, and I'll say z.string we invoke. So this tells us that this title must be a string. We can add more validation, for example, the minimum number of characters and the maximum number of characters. So right here I can say dot min, I invoke that, and I'll say minimum 3 characters. Then if the characters are less than 3 and we try to submit the form, we will draw an error message, include an object here, and we'll say message post title must be 3 or more characters long. Right here, we can also define a maximum number of characters required, and we will invoke. I'll set the maximum to be 200, and I'll pass an object, and I'll say message full colon post title must be 200 or fewer characters long, just like that. Now we have a schema right there for our post. Now to create a type, this is how we do it. We will export right here, and we will say type post schema type, and we'll set this to be equal to z.infer. We will say type of post schema. So we will use this post schema to create our type, and this now post schema type has title of type string. Now the schema has the type, which is string, and it has some validation going on. I'll go ahead and save that one, and at components, create a new folder, and I'll say posts. Inside posts, I'll create a new file, and this now will be the component for our form, and I'll say post form.tsx. Stateless functional component post form. Now here is where we'll make use of React hook form. We will be returning a form element just like that. We will call use form from React hook form and we will invoke it. This use form will have various stuff that it will give us and we can destructure them. So I'll say const, I will destructure those stuff from use form. So these will include register. So this will help us to define or register our input fields. And then we'll have _submit, which will help us to submit the form. We'll have reset, which will help us to reset the form once we submit it. And then here we'll have form state, and these will give us the error messages. So we will get errors like that. Now we need to type our form, and this is how we'll add the types. Right here, I'll include the angle brackets. Our types for the form will be coming from post schema type, which we just created right here at our post schema. So the reason why we included this separately is because we will need this post schema and this post schema type later on our backend, that is our Next.js server actions. So that's why we have it separated like this, and we can import them independently in various part of the application. So we define the type like that, and once I hover, you'll see now we have a title here, use form, and the title is string. Now we need the form here to make use of our schema to validate the form. Okay, remember this is only the type for the input fields, but we need to also validate the form. So this is what we will do. We'll say resolver full colon, and I'll say right here zod resolver, and that library is hook form and then stroke resolvers. So what you need to do is to just run npm I and install at hook form stroke resolvers, and that will give you zod resolver. And now right here, once we invoke this use form, actually we'll pass an object in here and we'll include our resolver there. Okay, let me fix this. So once you call, we pass an object and we call resolver, and the resolver will be zod resolver, and we pass it our schema, post schema. So once we do this, our React hook form will make use of zod to validate the form. In case of any errors, those errors will be reflected in this particular errors object, which comes from our React hook form. We will be having an input in our form here, and I want this input field to be reusable, and I also want it to make use of our React hook form. So to create an input field, what I'll do, I'll minimize everything here, and I'll come to components, and I'll add a new folder, and I'll call this one form. And here we'll be having any components related to a form, and those components are reusable, meaning that we can use it in posts. If you have login or register, you can use them there, and so on. So right here at form, I'll create a new file, and I'll call this one a form field.tsx, the trace functional component, and I'll say form field, just like that. We will define various types that we will need in it, and we'll have a div here, and in here we'll be having an input. So for the types, we'll make use of an interface. So I'll create an interface for the form field. I'll say interface form field props. Right here, we'll be having an ID, and I'll say the ID will be a string, a type. So the type is the type of the input. It can be text, number, and so on. So type will be a string. Then we'll have disabled. When submitting the form, we might want to disable the input. This will be a boolean. Then we'll have a placeholder, and this will be a string. We'll have register, and for this register, we will get something from React hook form. Use form register from React hook form. A generic type we do like that. And right here, we could pass field values, but later on we'll change these. So right here at our form field, we should get all these props and add the type. So right here, I'll destructure the props and I'll add the type at the end here, and the type now will be of type form field props. We get the various props, ID, type, disabled, and we'll have register. You can see I'm getting suggestions because I included the type there. And then I'll have errors. And you can see it complains because I had not defined the errors here. But we need to also have the errors. And then we'll have a placeholder. So let's come here and include our errors. And we'll say the errors is of type field errors. And this type will get it from our React hook form. Now, right here at our input, these can be self-closing input like that. And then right here, we'll pass various props to it. We'll say autocomplete, let this one be off. We'll pass the ID now, and the ID here will come from our ID right here. So ID to be ID. We'll say disabled will be equal to right here disabled register. We should spread it actually. So we include an object, we say register, but we spread this register like this. And then right here we will invoke it and we'll pass it ID. Placeholder, and we pass that placeholder like that. We pass the type to be type. So for now, let me save. We'll come back to styling it. Now, once we come to our post form, instead of passing input, we will pass this form field which have this input, and it is accepting all these props. We will be modifying these field values for some reason, but let's first see what we have. Right here, I'll call our form field and we will pass the various props. We'll pass an ID and we'll say the ID is title. We will pass register to be register. So as you can see now, we are making use of these which we were getting from our use form hook coming from our React hook form. So React hook form helps us to easily validate the input, and that is why we are using it. We already have an issue with the register. When I hover over it, you'll see type use form register title string is not assignable to use form register field values. The types are not compatible. Instead of using field values right here to define the type for register, we could make use of our post schema. But when we make use of post schema, that means that we have constrained our input field only validate if it is a post schema. But what if we had something like a login schema where we have email and password? That means that our input field will no longer be reusable in such a case. So that is why we will not define a specific type, but we will make it to be more flexible by using a generic. And this is how we will do it. Right here, we will pass a generic. T extends our field values. And once we do that, we'll just pass this T right here. We say T. Then we'll need to modify our form field component again, and we'll set this to be equal to, it should be having now this generic which we have defined here. I can just go ahead and copy it. So we define that generic here. T extends field values. We need to pass it again here. We say T like that, and you see the error disappears. So basically we are extending the field values, and this T generic just help us to make the input field to be more flexible so that we don't need to specify the schema for each of the posts that we will be creating. So here, instead of just saying ID, we will say IDs, and we'll have path from React hook form, and we will use this T generic like that. So right here, you'll see now this no longer throws an error because we included that T generic. So we will be passing the errors as errors, and then right here we will be passing placeholder as title, and then we'll say here disabled, or if our form is loading, so we'll set this to be equal to loading. So to fix loading, we just need to have a state here which will handle the loading state. I'll say const loading and set loading. And then at the end here, we'll just say use state from React, and then I invoke that. So we have fixed loading. Also, this is throwing an error here. I have seen the issue here. We said error, but we should have said errors. We bring that in from React hook form, and we remove this field error. It's errors, not error. And I save, and then right here you'll see this is resolved. And as you can see, we have made use of React hook form to create this reusable input field, just like that, and it's now right here. So to see if this field is there, what we can do is now make use of this post form component at our app. Remember, we are not yet hooking it at our app. So what I'll do, I'll minimize everything. I'll go to app page, and we'll make use of it right here. I'll just say post form like that, and I save. We will run this application. I remove everything here, and I'll say npm run dev, and I'll hit enter. So once this runs and we hit a refresh here, it should show us an input field which is not styled yet, but it should be functional. Okay, once this runs, you'll see that we are getting an error. I am importing a component that needs use state. So remember, we are working in Next.js. In Next.js, we have server components and we have client components. And once we make use of the use state hook, that means that we are inside a client component. So this post form should be a client component, and how we specify that this is a client component is by coming at the very top here and adding a directive use client. So right here I had forgotten, and we should say use client, and I go ahead and save. And other components that are child of that component will be treated as client components. Like this form field right here will now be treated as a client component, even though we didn't specify that use client right here. When this loads, you'll see we have title here, but this is an input field. Since we are using TailwindCSS, all the styles are like removed, but it is an input field. And when I click, you'll see that we are getting something. It is a string. But if we head here, form field, and we specify the type, we didn't specify type. If we specify type here to be password, and I save, you'll notice that this is now treated as an input field of type password. So you can see this particular input field or this particular component is very flexible. If I say this is an email, this now will be treated as an email. If I say it's a number, this input field will be treated as a number, and you can see we have increment and decrement, which is really cool. But in this case, by default, the type will not be a number, it will be type of text. So we don't need to specify. The other thing that we need to do now is to style this particular form field to look much better. Before we style, we will create the cn function because we will need it to conditionally render our styles. And to create that particular cn function, I'll come here, I'll minimize everything, and I'll create a new folder, and I'll call this particular folder lib. I'll create a new file, and actually this file I'll call it utils.ts. Now here we will create function, and this function you'll see it being used in libraries like shardcn for easier styling and merging the styles. So this is how we do it. We'll say import type class value, and I'll also import CLSX. This will come from that library that we called CLSX. So we are not supposed to have an equal sign here, just from. Then here we will import TW for Tailwind merge. This will come from Tailwind merge. At the bottom here, we will now export our cn function, export function cn. We will invoke it like that, and right here it will be having inputs of type class value, and we pass that as an array, and we will return something from this particular function, which is twmerge. We invoke it and we pass CLSX, and right here we include the inputs. Now this cn function is very useful in helping us to merge the various Tailwind classes and also to conditionally render the classes. So once we create it like that, we will just close that file. We don't need to use that file anymore. We'll just be calling the function from there. So what we need to do now, at our input here, I can come here and I'll say class name. Here, instead of using the quotes, I will call these curly brackets and I'll say cn, and now this cn comes from our lib utils and we invoke it. And this is now how we make use of this function. We can pass the various styles right here. I include the quotes and I'll say width will be full, then padding will be 3, margin along the y-axis will be 2. We'll say outline, let it be none. We'll have it to be rounded, MD. We'll also have it as disabled, and for disabled we'll have opacity of 70. We'll have disabled, and we'll have cursor as not allowed. We'll have a border select -300 for the color, and if I save, you'll see that these styles will already be applied to our input. And look, we have our input there. It has the border, it has some padding, which is cool. So remember, we had these errors, and we'll check if we have an error for this specific input currently. After we call our cn function, we passed this particular string of styles. But now at the end here, we can use a comma and we'll say errors and we say ID. So if we have an errors with the particular ID that we pass in, then we conditionally render that. So we'll say end. Right here, we include some other styles and we'll say border -rows 400. So this means that if we have errors for this particular input, we will override this particular color, border straight 300, and now it will be overridden to be this one, okay? It will show red. We'll come back to our post form here, and we will handle the submit for the form. Here we will be having on submit, and right here I'll say handle submit, invoke it, and we will pass the on submit function. This handle submit is this one, but we don't have this on submit, so let's define it here. We will just say const on submit. We will include some types for this one, submit handler, and this will come from React hook form. We pass the type, it will use post schema type, will be equal to, we invoke this and we'll say data, and then right here we will use an arrow function like that. So this is the type for this data right here. So here, if we successfully submit the form, we will be able to log something to the console, or we can alert. So right here, I can just say alert data. We should be having a button that will submit the form. So right here, let's just include a button and we'll say submit. So if we click this button, it will automatically submit the form. Let's try submit. And look, this border is now red because we have some errors on our input field. And the error is that we didn't include all the characters required. And if I include all of them and I click on submit, we get the alert of the data. So I think logging this to console was a better option, console.log of data, so that you can see what we have at data. And at the console, you'll see we have this object, and the object is having title as whatever we included here. Very nice. Now, another thing that I want us to do is to include the actual error message that we have. Right now, we don't know what the error is. So to do that, we'll come back to our form field and we will do it right here. and we will destructure the error message from errors. So at the top here, before our return, I'll just say const message, and I'll set this to be equal to errors. We pass the ID and errors. We pass the ID again. We conditionally check if we have the message as string. So we are setting the message to be errors.message in short, but we first check if it exists, okay? And now we'll have the error message here. So here we check, do we have an error message? If we do, we will show a span, and right here we will have our message. And now look, we have the error message showing. Post title must be 3 or more characters long. But if we start typing something, the error message automatically disappears. We can style this error message right here. We'll say class name. We'll say text hyphen small, and then text hyphen rows hyphen 400. And when I save, now we have the error message in red, just like we want. And that is how we can create our input field, our reusable input field. So for now, this episode is long enough, and in the next episode, we will create a reusable button and we'll add some more styles to this form. So I'll see you on the next one. In this episode, I want us to work on a reusable button component. I'll create a new file and I'll say button.tsx, and then status functional component. We'll go ahead and say button. We will be receiving various props, and I want us to define an interface. So right here I'll say interface, and then we will have button props. I'll have a label and I'll say this is a string. I'll have disabled, and this will be a boolean. And then right here we'll have an outline, and this will be an optional boolean. Okay, we will have small, a boolean again. We'll have a class name. So in case we want to customize individual buttons, we can be able to pass some class names. And then here we'll have an icon, which will be of type icon type. So we need to install React icons. I'll pop the terminal. So I can just add a new terminal right here. It's npm I react -icons, and I hit enter, and that will install React icons. This type will come from that particular library. Now right here we'll be having the type of the button. Is it type button, submit, reset? So we set the type here. It can be a string of a submit, or it can be a string of reset, or it can be just a button, or it could be undefined. It can be submit, reset, button, or undefined. Now that this has installed, I can come right here and use control space, and I'll import that from React icons like that. Then right here I'm supposed to use semicolon and not a colon. Now the other thing that we will have an onClick function. So if it's of type button, we will need to pass onClick, and here we will be receiving an event. Event will be of type react dot mouse event, and then here we'll say HTML button element as a generic there, this one, and we will be returning void like that. And these are now our types for the button props. We will receive all those right here. So there are two ways in which we can type out the props for a button component. We can just come right here and we say that the props will be of type button props, and then we can list the props right there. So for example, if I start typing L, we get suggestion of label. D, we get suggestion of disabled. O, we get suggestion of outline and onClick. But we can also do this way. We can come to the button right here, use a full colon, and then I can say react dot fc for functional component, use a generic here, and then we pass the button props. So once we do this, then we destructure our props, I think I removed the curly bracket there. You'll notice that this also works. So right here, I'll just say we'll have outline, then we'll have small, we will have class name, we'll have an icon, we'll have a type, and on click. When we come to our button here, we will display the label here. So I'll just say label. So far we can test it. So if I come to post form, I'll go ahead and remove this button, and here I'll say button. It will be self-closing. Okay, we need to first import it from form button, and it also complains about a missing prop, which is the label. So here we pass a label, and we can say submit, and I save. And once I save, you'll notice that nothing changes here. To make sure that it's the one, we can add a T, and I save, and you'll see now we have like double T for the button. And when I click, by default, it will submit the form. Now we need to style this button. So I'll come back to the button here. For this button, we'll be adding several stuff. We will say type to be type. So I'll say type to be type. We'll have on click to be on click, disabled to be disabled. Another thing that we can have now is a class name. Now for this class name, we'll be making use of the cn function that we created in a previous episode. So I'll call cn from our libs, and I will invoke it. Then we will pass these styles, which will be available by default. We will go ahead and say if it's disabled, and I'll use a full colon. We'll set an opacity of -70. If it's disabled again, we will set the cursor to be not allowed. We will have it as rounded -MD. We will have a hover effect. Let's set an opacity of 80. Then we can add a transition. Width will be auto. We will add a border, and we'll say slate 300. Then we will flex the item, and the item includes this label, and we'll also be adding an icon there. So we flex the label and the icon. We'll set the items to the center. We will justify to the center, so we just center them nicely. Then right here I'll add a gap of 2. Padding along the y-axis to be 3, and padding along the x-axis to be 5. And we'll set a border width of 2. We'll have a background color of slate -700. Text will be white, and margin along the y-axis will be 2. So far, if I save that, you'll see that we already have a very nice button going on. Okay, there we go. Some styles didn't work, like rounded. I messed the spelling, so I fix rounded, but the width, it will follow the width of the parent. So once we fix the parent is the form. Inside still our cn function, I'll use a comma, then I'll hit enter, and here we can say outline. So remember, we were bringing in outline as a prop. So if it's true, if this is supposed to be an outline, that means that we should not be having this background color. I'll just say quotes and then bg -transparent. So text will be straight 700. We'll have small. So if small prop is true, then we will add some styles here or override the existing one. Remember also here we should include a comma, and we'll say text first of all to be small, then padding along the y-axis to be 1, padding along the x-axis to be 2, border to be a custom one here of 1 px. And that way, once we pass the small prop, you'll notice that our button will be smaller because we have decreased the text, the padding, and also the border. Now here we'll also add a condition in case we pass our own styles to this particular button. We will override the defaults by using the class name. So right here I'll just say class name. Okay, if we have a class name, and let's just show those class name. So the class name, remember, it will come in as a string. Okay, now let's test these styles. I save, I come to post form. Let's say we want a small button. So if I just say outline, that will be treated as true. And if I save, you see our button is outlined. If we say small, our button will be smaller. So I save, and look, our button is smaller. And this is how you can create a reusable button component. It's actually very easy. So if we pass a class name and we pass it as a string here, for example, let's say bg, remember this is outlined, but we can override it even because of our cn function. So if I say bg red hyphen 500 and save, you see our class name here is overriding all the other styles, and you can actually like just style it normally if you want to. Another thing that we will be adding to, you can add to a button, is an icon. So right here I'll just say, do we have an icon? Remember, we passed an icon as a prop. We will change this. We will type it to use a caps here because a component is supposed to start with a capital letter, and we can change its name this way. So now right here we can say if we have the icon, let's go ahead and we show the icon. So I'll say icon like that, and here we can actually specify a prop, and we'll say size to be 20. So how does this icon know that we can pass the size prop? That is because we already specified that the icon is of type icon type coming from React icons, and this icon type already know that we can pass a size. So that is the icon. Maybe we can try to show an icon here. I can say icon. Okay, pass an icon from React icons. We should pass it a directory like this. So I go ahead and save. So as you can see, we have an icon, but I think it's pointing to the wrong direction. We should have said from left, and we make sure to import it. So if I save, now it will point this way. Okay, that's it. So I go ahead and remove this import, which we are not using. Now look, we have set even an icon. You can include some icons from React icons. So here we'll just say label to be submit. We will not make it to be outline. We'll just make it to be block or something. We can have disabled, and the button will be disabled if we are loading. So I'll say loading like that, and then for this icon I'll conditionally render the icon. Like if we are loading, we can show undefined, but if we are not loading, we will show this arrow. Right here you can include a spinner, but for now I'll just leave it like that. Also for the label, we will conditionally render this submit right here, and we'll say if we are loading again, we will call here submitting, else we will have submit. So right here we'll have submitting, else we'll have submit, and also the icon will change there. And by default we are not loading, so right here we can set loading to true, and if I save, we will be having these if we are submitting the form, and here by default we will have false. I save. So we have created a reusable button component. Another thing that I will do is that this form will add some styles. So right here I'll add a class name, and I'll make use of the cn function. Cn, I invoke it and pass some styles. Flex, then here I'll say flex hyphen column. We'll have max hyphen width hyphen to be 500. So we decrease the size of this form. It was too big initially. If I expand here, you'll notice this goes all the way, occupies the entire screen, but I don't want it to be that big, so we limit the width. Also we import this cn function from our libs. Now after max width 500 px, we'll have m to be auto. So let me show you something. If I happen to save and I expand this, you'll notice that it's short now, okay? And also this is going with the width of our form. Now I want this to be at the center here. That is where we use m-auto. That is margin to be auto. That will center it. And if I come now, you'll see that this moves at the center there. Very nice. Now we come here. I'll set margin to the top of about 8 and I go ahead and save. We'll be having a heading, and you can also create a reusable header component. I'll just minimize here and I'll create a new folder inside components, and I'll say common. Inside common, I'll create a new file and I'll say header.tsx. We just say stateless functional component. I'll say header. We will just have a div. This div will wrap our h1. Right here, we'll have a class name. We will center the heading depending on whether we specify it to be at the center or not. So that center will receive it via props right here. I'll say center. We will need to type it, but if we have the center, we will display text center, else we will say text to be start. At the top here, we will have an interface and we'll say heading props. We'll have a title of string. We will have that center that we have already used, which will be optional boolean, and we'll have LG, meaning whether it's a large heading or not, and I'll say boolean. Then we type out our props, and I told you we can do it this way. We just include heading props there, and then right here we'll bring in center. We'll have the title. Maybe you can press them in order. Title, center, then LG at the end here. Now right here we'll have our heading, and we will be passing the title in here. We'll add some styles, so I'll say class name, and here I'll make use of the cn function. Make sure to import it from our libs by using Control space and clicking it to import. Then right here we invoke it and we pass the first string. Font will be bold, text will be super large here because it's a heading, so 2XL. Then right here margin along the y-axis of 2. Right here we will conditionally render. We'll say LG. If that is true, then we will make the text even to be bigger, and we'll say text to be 4XL. And that's it. That is how you can create a reusable heading component. And we come to our post form, and we'll make use of it just before our form field. I will say heading. We will pass a title. Later on we will be conditionally rendering the title depending on whether we are creating a post or editing it. But for now we'll just say create space post. We import this heading. We didn't call it heading, we called it header, sorry, and I save. But now this is like a small heading. If we come here and say LG and save, you see this is bigger. And if you want like the big heading to be a H1, the small heading to be like a H3, you can still do that. You can conditionally render the whole of these. You just come right here and you say LG and you pass these as the default. So I can cut that and include it here. Okay, to fix the styles, we will remove this. The text size will be 4. So this is our big heading, H1. If you want your smaller headings to be, you know, a H3 or something like that, we just come down here and we'll say if it's not large. And then here, instead of showing H1, we show H3. Now for large heading, it will be H1. For normal headings, it will be H3. Here we will say 2 and I save. Then here if we say LG and save, that will be big heading. So this is H1, then this is H3. So now, as you can see, we have completed creating this form. We have this input field, reusable button. Every component here is easily reusable. You can expand your application further. And the next thing that now we will handle is submitting this form. And during the submit of the form, we will be calling this function here on submit, and we'll be doing stuff here. Normally, we will make a call to an API endpoint, but now in this case, we will be making use of a Next.js server actions. In this episode, we are going to create a PostgresSQL database on Neon, and we will also work on our Prisma schema. So far, we were able to create our form, and in order to submit the form and save the data in our database, we will need to have a database. So that's why we need to create it right now. All you need to do is to go to neon.tech, and then you'll create an account. And we have a free tier which you can use. So once you log in, you'll be able to create a free database and a project. So in my case, I'll just add a new project and I'll give it a name. Then you can choose a version, a region, and I think for your case, you'll have an option to choose a database name. In this case, I think it will be auto-generated, and I'll go ahead and create the project. Once I create the project, I can go to the dashboard. So this is the connection string to our Postgres database, okay? And right here, you can also select the different framework or language which you like to connect to. In this case, we'll be making use of Prisma. And when I come to Prisma, this is how you will start your Prisma schema, and this is how you'll create your .env file. So let's just do those two things right now, and I'll minimize everything. First of all, I'll add a .env file. So right here, I'll say .env. You go to .gitignore, make sure that you ignore .env file so that you don't push it on GitHub. So right here, I'll say .env, like that. I save that file and close it. Then right here at .env, I can come back to the browser and I will copy this one here. I'll copy. Then I come back and I just paste here. I remove this comment, and just like that, we have added our PostgreSQL string to our .env. So I can now close that file. The next thing is to create a Prisma schema. So at the root here, I'll add a new folder and I'll say Prisma. Inside Prisma, I'll add a new file and I'll say schema.prisma. Now I come back to our browser here and I select schema Prisma and I'll copy this data source. I can just copy snippet, then I come back right here and I will paste it. I can remove the comments. I'll pop the terminal by using Ctrl+J. Then I can add a new terminal, and right here I'll say npm I, then -d to install Prisma as a dev dependency. So I'll click enter. So right here I'll say npm I, and I'll say at Prisma, then stroke client. I go ahead and install that one as well. We need to add more stuff here. We have added the data source, and we are specifying that the URL will be coming from our .env file, and it will be called database URL, the URL for our PostgreSQL database. Now, right here, we will say generator client, and here you'll say provider will be equal to Prisma client.js. Then down here is where we will create a schema for our post. We'll just say model post, and this post will have an ID. We'll say string and at ID at default UUID, and we invoke it. Okay, here we have so many brackets. I need to remove one, so it should be like that. Also, I should not have this full colon. And then we will be having a title, and this will be a string. Then I can say posted at, and this will be date time. Then it will be auto generated, so we'll say at default now, like that. And this is our post schema, as simple as that. For this Prisma client, we need to make it global for it to be easily usable on our development mode. So what I'll do is that I'll create a new file inside our lib, and I'll say this is a prisma.db.ts, and right here we will import our Prisma client from at Prisma client. So if you go to your package.json, you should make sure that you have this installed at Prisma stroke client, and also you should have Prisma right here installed. Okay, now if I come right here, I'll just say import Prisma client. These will be coming from at Prisma stroke client. Now here we could export a Prisma client like this, const Prisma db to be equal to, we initialize our Prisma client by saying new Prisma client, and we invoke it. So we could just export this one right here, Prisma db. On development mode, these will be created each time our app port reloads, and that will create many instances of Prisma client and causing like warnings on our terminal. We will make sure that every time our app hot reloads, we will first check if we already have a Prisma client, and if we do, we will like reuse that instead of creating a new one. And this is how we will do it. We will say const Prisma db is equals to new Prisma client, and we'll make use of the global variable in JavaScript, global this, and I'll say right here, instead of saying it's equal to new Prisma client, we'll say is equal to global this dot Prisma. So we'll attach Prisma into this global this, and if this doesn't have a value, that is when we'll set it to be equal to a new instance of our Prisma client. Now we need to assign this global this a value, and we'll do it down here. First of all, we perform a check and make sure that we are in development mode. So we'll say if process .env.node environment is not equal to production, that means that we are in development. Then right here we'll assign global this .prisma to be equal to our Prisma db. This one right here. Remember, if these don't have a value, it will initialize a new one, so we'll store it there, and then we'll perform a check and store that in our global this.prisma. So this is complaining because we haven't added a type yet for this particular Prisma here. So we'll do it just right here, and I'll say declare, we'll say global, and we'll create a variable for Prisma, and we'll assign that to be of type Prisma client, or it can be undefined, just like that. Then we just export this Prisma db down here. We'll say export default, and we'll say Prisma db. Now this Prisma db or this Prisma client is what will help us to interact with the database. So I'll go ahead and save that. Now coming back to our schema, I know some of you might not have, you know, the nice colors and so on, might be just plain white, and that is because I'm using an extension. So I can just check it out. There is a Prisma extension that I'm using called Prisma. So you need to install this extension for you to get the nice styles. Okay, then this one is kind of weird. I think I should include some space there, and you can see now also this is nicely nicely styled. So now we have created our Prisma schema. We have created a DB on Neon, and we connected to our database using this connection string. We came to schema.prisma and made use of that connection string right here. Said provider is Postgres, and also we made sure that we generated a client and we created a model or a schema for our post. Now for us to generate types from this particular Prisma schema, we will come at the terminal and we'll say npx Prisma, generate, hit enter, because we might need to use the post type right here from Prisma schema. And then for us to make our schema to be in sync with our database, we'll say right here npx Prisma db push, hit enter, and that will put in sync our Prisma schema right here with our Postgres database at Neon. And as you can see, Prisma schema loaded from Prisma schema.prisma, and your database is now in sync with your Prisma schema. You can run npx Prisma Studio to view the different tables that we have at our database. npx Prisma Studio and hit enter. So once we do that, it will generate a URL right here, and as you can see, it have opened on the browser at localhost 5555. And since we did a Prisma DB push, you'll notice that we have our model right here, and it generated a table at our database, although now our table don't have any records. So if you need to check what you have at the table or the database, you can just run this particular command, npx Prisma Studio, to check what you have on the table. And you can leave it running on this particular terminal, and you have your project running on a different terminal. In this episode, we are going to submit our form and be able to save our post on the Postgres database that we created in the previous episode by making use of a Next.js server action. So normally, when submitting a form like this, we are already calling our onSubmit function right here by making use of onSubmit event handler, and we are calling it like this. So currently we are logging this to the console, and if we were making a HTTP request to an API during submitting our data, this is how we will do it. We will say axios.post, then we pass the API right here. Maybe it will be API /post /create. But in this case, we are not making a call to an API, but we will be making a call to a server action. So let's create a server action, and you'll see how that works out, and you'll see how easy it is to work with Next.js server actions. I'll add a folder at the root here, and I'll say actions. Now inside actions, I'll add a new file, and I'll say post server actions.ts. So we'll create various functions in this particular file. To specify that the functions in this particular file are server actions, we add a directive right here, use server. And now right here, we can just create a function, and I'll say export const create post, and this will be equal to an arrow function, just like this. In this create post, we will receive some values. So right here I'll say values, and we can specify the type for these values. Remember, we had created a schema right here, and we were exporting the type for our post. So now we can reuse this type right here. We can say the values here will be of type post schema type, just like that. Then this function should be an async function. So a server action is an async function. So right here I'll say async, and we get the values, and we do something with the values right here. So if I go ahead and say console.log of values, and right here we log the values to the console, and I save, then we make use of this create post, which is now a server function or a server action on our post form. So all we need to do is to call that right here. We say create post, and we bring it in from actions, post server actions. I invoke that, and I say data. So we pass our data to that create post. So by just doing this, the data will be passed to this particular create post function as values, and we will be able to log it to the console. But where will this console log show at? Is it on the browser or on our server terminal? Guess what? This console log will show on our server terminal, meaning that this function is running on the server, and not on the client. If it were running on the client, it will show this console log on our browser. So let's go ahead and save this and we test it out. So we go back to our application and let's create a post. We will say test post and I click on submit. And once I submit, you'll notice at our terminal, we get these values: title, test post. This is being logged by this particular function at our terminal. And this terminal is acting as our development server. So we are successfully passing these values from the client to the server. And you can see how easy it is. We didn't make a call to any API like using Axios or using fetch. We just imported the function and made a call to it. Now we will continue creating this particular function so that we can save the data to the database, and also we validate the values on the server. Okay, remember that data validation is more secure if it's done on the server, and doing data validation on the client is just for better UX, better user experience. Okay, but for tight security, we do validation on the server as well. So right here, we'll go ahead and validate these. We'll say post schema. We import it from our schemas post schema. We had created this schema using Zod. We say dot save pass. We invoke this and we pass our values. Then what we will get back is some validated fields. So I'll say const validated fields will be equal to post schema dot save pass. Then we pass our values there. We check if validated fields have a success value. If it has a success value, then the data is valid, else it's not valid. So right here, I'll perform a check. I'll say if we don't have a validated fields dot success, that means that our data here is not valid as per our post schema. Therefore, we return immediately an error. So right here, I'll go ahead and I'll return an error object and I'll say invalid fields. Then if this passes, that means that our fields are valid and we can extract our post title from our values, or rather we can use this validated fields dot data. That is where our values will be stored. Validated fields dot data. We get our title, and now we can save this title on our database, and we will make use of PrismaDB, the Prisma client that we had made global earlier. So right here, we will use a try and catch block just in case of any issues. We'll be able to catch the error, and inside the try, we will say await PrismaDB. We bring it in from our lib PrismaDB. Then we say here dot post. Now we are getting this nice suggestion because we had run npx prisma generate in our previous episode. So we say dot post and then dot create. We invoke these, then we pass our data, and I'll say data full colon will be an object, and I'll pass the title. If the key and value are the same, we just pass title like that. And by this, we have already created a post in our database whenever we submit right here, assuming we don't get any error. Now, once this is successful, right here, we will return and we will say success, and we will say right here, post created. Inside the error, in case of an error, we will return an error object. So return an object, we say error, colon. Then we don't know the exact issue, so I'll just say a server error occurred. It's not that quite clear, but we'll just say that. Now, once we do this, actually let's remove this import that was accidental. We can test if we are able to create our post in our database. So right here, we will say first post. I go ahead and submit. Once I submit, you'll see nothing happens because we need to handle loading, success, and error on the client. But we can confirm if the post was created by going to our Prisma Studio. Remember, we had run our Prisma Studio in the last episode by saying npx Prisma Studio. By running this command on the terminal, it will open on this particular URL right here. And if I refresh, we should have at least one post, which is our first post. So I refresh here and look, we have a post and it is saying first post. And making use of server action is that easy. Okay, we just created a function, we received the value, then whatever we do here is what you will do on a normal API endpoint. On a post API endpoint, you will first validate the values, then you will just create the value. And as you can see, it's much easier to make use of server actions than making use of APIs. Another thing that we will do is to handle this error and this success on our UI, so that whenever we submit the post, we will know if the post was successfully submitted or if we got an error. So how would we handle the success and the error? So since it's an async function, this create post, remember we made it to be an async function. So right here, all I'll do is to say .then, and here we will get a data and we'll pass an arrow function like this. And right here we can handle any success or any error. And then right here I'll have a .finary, and here we can stop any loading state. Okay, before we submit or before we call create post, we will make set loading here to be true. So right here I'll say set loading, and I'll say this will be true. Then we make a call to our server action. Right here we get data. This data will have either .error or .success. Remember, if I come to our server action, we are returning an object of error or an object of success. So it will either have .error or .success. So we can set the various state for error and success. Let's first define the state. I'll say const success or set success will be equal to use state, and we invoke that. It will be an empty string. Then right here we define the type. It can be either a string or it can be undefined. Then we'll have a similar thing for the error. So I duplicate that one, and right here I'll have error. Then set error. It will either be a string or undefined, by default an empty string. Then we come right here and we'll say set error to be data dot error. So if this data have error, it will be set to be there, else it will just be undefined. Okay, then set success to be data dot success, just like that. Then here finally we will now turn our loading to false. We'll set loading, we invoke it, and we say false. Now we have the various states for loading, error, and success, and we can make use of those on our form here. We can clear the form, we can show the loading state, we can show a success message, and that is what we are going to do now. So right here, maybe before our button, after our form field, we will say if we have an error, then let's show an error right here. We'll say a div, and right here we'll just say error from our state. Then we'll have various styles. So I'll add a class name, and I'll say text will be small. Then we'll have text as rows 400. If we had success, I'll just duplicate that one. Here we say success. If we had success, we will show a green text. So instead of rows, we show green 400. Then instead of error here, we show success. Another thing is the loading state. If we are loading, we will be submitting, else it will be submit. Now so far we should be able to see the error or the success. So if I submit, post title must be 3 or more characters. That is the normal client error. Let's create another post, and I can say second post submit, submitting. Once it's submitted, you'll see post created right here, but we are not clearing our form. So how can we clear our React hook form? So we had brought in reset right here, and this reset resets our form. So I want us, whenever we have a success, we will go ahead and reset the form. For us to do that, we can make use of the use effect hook in React. So after this right here, I'll go ahead and I'll call use effect and I'll invoke it. Use effect accepts two parameters, an arrow function here which will be called, and then a second parameter is an array of dependencies. So use effect, when we do it like this with an empty array, it will only run once when our application renders. But whenever the dependencies changes, if we pass some dependencies, some variables, whenever they change, our use effect will be called again. So right here, I'll just pass success as a dependency. So whenever success status changes, then our use effect will be called again. And inside this function, at the body of the function right here, we can perform some checks using this success. We will say if we have a success, then we can do something right here. The first thing that we will do, we will reset our form. So we call a reset. And this will basically clear the form. We can test it out. I'll save. Let's submit another post, and I'll say that post, and I'll submit. And as you can see, after it's submitted, this cleared, our form cleared. Now I also want this particular success message to disappear after some time, okay? So after like 3 seconds or 2 seconds, we clear the success message. This is how we can do it. Still at our use effect, after our reset, I'll create a timer, and I'll say const timer will be equal to, we create a timeout. So I'll say set timeout, which is a JavaScript built-in function. And right here, the first parameter is a function that will run after the time is over that we will set. So this function will run after the time that we specify right here is over. So 200 milliseconds is basically 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, this function will run. And what do we want to do after 2 seconds? We want to clear our success message. So right here, say set success to be undefined. And then once we make use of a timeout, we should call a clear timeout or a cleanup function when making use of this particular use effect. So at the end here, we will return what we call a cleanup function. And what we will say in this function is to call clear timeout. So clear timeout, and we pass our timer variable right here. So we say timer. This will prevent having several timeouts like running at the same time whenever success changes. Therefore, this like clears, and we'll be setting a new timeout whenever success changes. So I go ahead and save, and now you'll notice that this post created will clear after some time. So first of all, let me refresh, and we can create our fourth post. You can say fourth post, and I submit. Submitting, after some time, this post created disappears. And that is how you can create a success message that goes away. So in the next video, we will create another server action that will help us to get the data from our database, and we'll be able to list the data right here, all the posts. So see you on the next one. In the last episode, we started taking a look at server actions, and we were able to create a server action that helped us create all these posts on our database. And in this episode, I want us to look further about server actions before we proceed to creating another server action that will help us to fetch all these posts from the database and show on the UI. So we'll just go through the documentation here of server actions and mutations. Now, there are two main ways in which we create server actions. The first way is the one that we did on our application. That is, we create a separate file like this. We mark the file as use server, this use server directive, and all the functions that we will create here will be treated as server actions. Now, the other way is creating a server action at a server component. Remember, in Next.js, we have two kinds of components, client components and server components. Client components we mark them with the use client directive. And in client components is where we have things like the use state, we have events like on click and so on. But for server component, we don't make use of the use state and so on. So this page, the default page, this is an example of a server component, and it don't have the use client directive by default. It will be treated as a server component. So our function right here, we could technically create it in our server component, in a server component like this one, right? So if I check the documentation, you'll see the convention or the syntax of doing that. So we have a page here. The page is a server component. Then right here, we have a server action being created. We just create an async function. And inside this function, we add a use server directive. And the code that we write right here will now be called on the server. So this is the second way in which you can do it. You create this in a server component. With client components, we can only call those particular functions. And also, there are two ways in which we get the function in a client component. The first way is to import functions that were created separately. We import functions that were created separately in a separate file to a client component, just like we did. Now, the other way is that we can pass server actions as props. If we created the server action right here, let me just copy this one, and we want to make use of this create in our post form, we can pass this create as a prop to this post form. Then in our post form, we will receive it as a prop, and we will make use of that action whichever place we want in our code. So the first way of bringing in server actions to a client component is first to import it if we created it on a separate file, just like this. The other way is to pass it as props. So an example of that is just right here. Right here, they are passing update item as a prop. Update item, I'm assuming it's a server action, and then they are receiving it as a prop like this and making use of it in a form. And another way of calling the server action in a form is by making use of this action attribute, okay? So basically, you can go through this documentation if you want to understand further about server actions. Now, in the next episode, let's see how we can fetch our data from the DB. In this episode, we will create a server action that will help us fetch our data from the DB, and then we will list it down here. And let's just get right into it. I'll just go to our post server action. Right here, we'll just say export, and we'll say const get posts. We'll make this to be an async. Then we pass an arrow function just like that. Now right here, we'll just have a try and catch block. For try, we will just get all the posts from the server. Const posts will be equal to await. We make use of our PrismaDB, which is our Prisma client, .post.find many. We invoke that, we pass an object, and right here all we can do is order by, and we will say posted at :descending. So this will make the posts that were created last to show at the top, or to be the first one. We'll come down here, we'll just say return success : and we pass our posts in this particular success property. So we'll get our posts by saying like something like data.success, then get posts. Then in case of an error, we return an error object. So I'll say return error : and I'll say server error. And just like that, we have created a server action that gets all the posts from our DB, and we'll be able to get them on the UI once we call this particular function. We will go to our components, and we will create a component that will help us to list the posts, okay? In components, posts, I'll create a new file, and I'll say list posts.tsx. SFC stateless functional component, and I'll hit enter. List posts. These will be a sync function, and right here we will be returning a div, and we could fetch our post right here. We can say const posts to be equal to, we await our get posts server action and we invoke it. And believe me not, we get our post just like that. And note that this list posts is a server component. So we get our posts and we will be able now to map through the posts if they exist, and then we show them on the UI. So what I'll do, I'll make sure that this has success. Before we return, I'll come right here and I'll say if we have our posts dot success, then let's now go ahead and return. And then right here we will map through the posts. So right here I'll say posts dot success, then dot map. Remember, our success will have an array of posts. Then we invoke these. We'll get a post at a time. We pass an arrow function right here, and right here we should return again. We return a div. So inside here we will be having several stuff. First one is a span, and here we will show the post title. So remember, we get a post at a time here, and I'll say post dot title. That should show a post on our UI. Let's save and test before we even style anything. So once I save, nothing happens, but let's refresh and see. We refresh. Oops, nothing happens still. So we need to hook our component, our list post component, to our page. So just below our post form, we need to say list posts, and we import this one. So I save, let's refresh. And here we go, they are here. We are able to list all the posts. If I happen to create another post, I can say another one, and I submit post created. You'll notice that it is not being added right here. It's not being automatically fetched. For us to fix that, we have a function in Next.js, and that will detect any changes to the post. So inside create post, after we successfully create the post, before we return right here, we can call revalidate path. We invoke it and we pass our path that we want it to revalidate or re-render or something, so that these will automatically be updated. Let's test it out and see if that changes. So first of all, I refresh and you'll see another one here. Now right here I'll say another, that is one. Now let's say another 2 and submitting post created, and you see here another 2. So we didn't have to refresh our application. So all we did is to call this particular function revalidate path, and we say the path that should be revalidated. We will do a similar thing to our get post right here. So right here we just make sure to do the same thing. Now that we are able to get this, we can go ahead and style them so that they show nicely right here. This is the container div, so we'll just add a class name, and right here I'll say flex hyphen call, then max hyphen width hyphen 500 px, margin to be auto. And by just doing that and saving, you'll see that these will now be here at the center. We style individual posts. First of all, after mapping, these should be having a key, so we add a key prop, and I'll say key will be post.id. Then right here we'll add a class name, and we'll say margin along the y-axis to be 2. We will flex the item. We'll say items to be at the center. Then we'll have a gap of 3. We'll justify between. So here we'll be having 2 things, the title and then a section where we have the edit and the delete icons. We'll say width to be full. We'll have rounded, and then padding to be 2, and we'll have a border to the bottom. So I'll just say border -b. So here we have the title. Then right here we will be adding a div. In here we'll be having 2 things. So we'll say E for edit, then I can duplicate that, and we'll be having D for delete. And once I save, we come back here, you see we have this bottom line, then we included some spacing around our post, then we have this E and D, E for edit and D for delete. I come back again, and for this particular div we'll have a class name, and we'll flex, we'll add a gap of 2, and we'll say items center so that they are in arrow. I come back, and now look, our posts will look like this. I think this does not have to be rounded. This line have some rounding there. I think if it's just straight, will be much better. So I'll come back right here and I'll remove this rounded and I'll save. So we have been able to fetch our post and we are showing them on the UI. Now in the next episode, we will create another server action that will help us to delete a post. In this episode, I want us to work on delete. So for delete, we just go ahead and create a server action in post server actions. It's just a similar thing, very easy. So right here, we will export a function. We will say const delete post to be equal to an async function. Right here for delete, we will be receiving a post, and this post will be of type post, and this type will come from our Prisma client. So we import it from Prisma client. Then this will be an arrow function, just like that. In here, we just make use of a try and catch block. Inside try, we will just await Prisma db.post.delete. We invoke that and we receive this post because we need that ID for the post to delete it. So right here, we'll say where full colon, we pass an object, we say ID is post.id. And by just that, this will delete the post from the database. We need to return a success once it's deleted. So I'll say return success object full colon and I'll say post deleted. Another thing that we will do so that the post is automatically removed from the UI is to revalidate the path. Revalidate path and we say this is the route, just like that. In our catch, we will return an error object. So I'll just say error full colon server error. And this is our delete server action. Inside our list post, this is where we'll be having a delete, but we will create that component first. So I minimize everything, components, posts, add a new file, and I'll say delete post.tsx. In here, stateless functional component. So we will be returning a button to delete a post. Right here, we will return a button. This button will just have an icon for delete. Another thing is that this will receive a prop, which is the post. So we'll say post. Then right here, we type out the post. We will say we'll have a post, and the type for this post will be coming from our Prisma client. The reason why we use this type instead of the one that we created on our schemas is because they are kind of different. Remember, this has only the title, but our post will have an ID and it will also have when the post was created. So those extra properties we can't use of this post schema type. This was just for the form, but for these other use cases, we get the type from our Prisma client. For icons, we will use React icons. So you need to install that library. I'll hit Ctrl J, add a terminal here, and I'll say npm I react -icons. I hit enter. I don't know if we had installed that library area. Had we? I think we had when working with our button. So most probably you already had it installed. So the first thing that we will check here, if the post is not loading, we will show our delete button, our delete icon, that is. So we'll say if it's not loading, and right here we will have md delete. This is a button that will come from our React icons. We can specify a prop, a size prop, and I'll say the size here will be 20. Now we don't have this loading state, but we can easily create that. We can just say const loading, and we'll have set loading, which will update our state, and we'll set this to be equal to use state, invoke that, and we'll say here false. If we come to list post, you'll notice that this is a server component, but this one, delete and edit, will be client components. So for client components, we should include use client at the top here so that we don't get an error. just like that. Then we create our state. When it's loading, we will show a spinner. So right here, I'll say if our delete is loading, we'll say end, and right here we will show I am spinner, which is an icon again from React icons. So we import it. So if it's loading, we'll have a spinner. If it's not loading, we'll have just a delete icon. For now, let's save that. Then we hook this delete post to our list post. Instead of this one now, right here, we will call our delete post component. We should import it just like that. And also it expects us to pass it a post prop. So you say post is post. Once we save, we should see this as an icon. And look, we have a delete icon going on there. If loading is true, we will have the spinner icon, this one. So I save, and this now will be a spinner icon. You see, it's a spinner icon. We can make this spinner rotate easily with TailwindCSS. Here we just add a class name and we'll say animate hyphen spin. I save, and these will rotate now. So when we are deleting, we will see this. When it's done, we'll see our delete icon. So we take this back to false, and then we go ahead and handle the delete now. We already have our server action for deleting. We just need to make a call to it. So right here, when we click this button, we will have an on-click event. So on click, then here we will call a function, and the function will call it handle delete. In this function, we will pass our post, and we don't have it currently defined, so we define it at the top here. We say const handle delete will be equal to an async arrow function, which will receive the post. The post will be of type post from Prisma client. We had already imported that. Then we say that this is an arrow function. So we'll say const response will be equal to, we await, and we call our delete post. We invoke it, we say post, this is delete, and we import this from our server action. We pass the post. This post will be received right here as post. Then we will delete using that post ID. We get a response. You could make use of this response to show a success or something like that. But in this case, I'll not do anything. What I'll do right here is to just set loading to true before we start deleting here. After we complete deleting, we will set loading to false. Since I'm not making use of the response, I can just remove it, but the response have response.success. So if you want to show a success message, you can make use of that. Or if you want to show an error, you can make use of that. So right now I'll just save, and these should delete a post, and we'll have some loading going on and so on. So let's test it out. Let's delete another two. Delete loading. Once it's deleted, you see it's gone. It's no longer on our UI. It's automatically updated because of our validate path function. We can make the styling for the delete icon to be much better. So at our button, we'll have a class name. We'll just change the text to be thread 500, and we go ahead and save. Now this will be a bit pale, which I think it's much better. So that is the delete functionality, the UI plus the server action. Next, let's see how we can update a post, and that will be our last CRUD operation. In this episode, we will handle the last part of this course, which is editing a post. To begin with, we will create a server action that will handle edit on our database. We will just come to post server actions, then we will export a function. We can say edit post to be equal to async. Then we'll have post of type post plus an arrow function. We will get the post that we want to edit, and then we will get a title string that will be our update now. We'll say await, PrismaDB, which is our Prisma client, dot post dot update. We invoke it, we pass an object, we say where, then right here we'll specify the ID is post.id. Then this expects us to pass the data that will be the update. So right here, comma, and I'll say data full colon, and right here we will have title. At our catch, we will return error full colon, and we'll say server error. Right here we will go ahead and we will return, and right here I'll say success full colon, and I'll say post edited. Right here, let's also revalidate our path. You can just copy this one and pass it there. Now when we call this function with a post and an updated title, then we will be able to edit that post in our database. I'll go ahead and save. Let's now go to the UI. So this should be an edit icon, and here we will just pass the edit component. So let's create that component first. I'll come to components, posts, and I'll add a new file, and I'll say edit post.tsx status functional component, and I'll say edit post. Edit post will be a client component, so at the very top we should have a use client directive. Use client. We will be having an edit button, and we will have a state right here of is editing. Const is editing, set is editing. We'll set this to be equal to use state. We invoke and we'll say false. We import use state from React. Here we use these empty fragments, which are React fragments, and we will have a condition. If we are not editing a post, that means that we don't have the model open for editing, then we will show the icon for edit. So here we will have a button. Then inside this button, we will pass the edit icon, which will be at md edit. We will import it from React icons, and we will self close it like that. It will have the size plop, and we can say size of 20, just like that. For this particular button right here, we'll have a class name, and we'll set the cursor to be pointer, text thread 500. We hook this edit post at our list post, just like we did with the delete. We import it, I save, and we should be having now an edit icon right here. There we go, we have the edit icon. When we click this particular button, which have the edit icon, I want us to open the model. So we will switch this is editing from false to true. And right here, I'll have an on-click event, and we'll say handle open editing. Let's create this function, const handle open editing, and we'll set is editing to true. We will have const handle close editing, so set is editing to false. Now when we click, this will set is editing to true, and when we click another button which we will set later on, we will have these being set as false. So now right here, if is editing is true, that means that we are in an edit mode. We will show something else here. So is editing, and we will have a div. For this div, we will have a class name for it. We will set it to be absolute, so it will be absolute to the body. We will have top as 0, left as 0. This will occupy the entire screen, so we'll have width as screen, height as screen. Then let's have a z index of 2, bg hyphen thread hyphen 500. And right now, if I save, you'll notice our screen will go dark. Right now we are not in edit mode, but if I click edit, there we go, we have it as dark. I want this to have an opacity so that we can straightly see whatever is at the background. So I'll set an opacity of about 70 or 80, and we can like see whatever is on our background. We'll flex the items that will be here. Here we'll be having an edit form, so we want it to be at the center. So we will say flex, and then we'll have items at the center, and we will justify center. Very nice. Inside this div, we will now have another div, and for this div we will show two things. We will show a button, and this button will basically help us to close the edit mode, and then right here we will be showing a form which will help us edit the post. And for the form, amazingly, we will be reusing our post form right here, only that we'll be doing some changes so that we know that we are in edit mode, and we submit an edit request instead of a create request. So right here we will be having our post form, and right here we'll be having a button that will close our edit mode. So here we will have an icon, and I'll say md close. For this icon we will have a size, and we can make this one to be bigger than other icons that we had set. I'll say 28. Let's import this from React icons, and right here I'll just say on click, then we will call our handle close editing, which will turn is editing to false. So we save. Once I save, you'll notice that here we have the create post form, the title, and submit. But right now when we add a title here and submit, it will basically like add a new post, but we want to handle editing here, so we need to do further modifications. And the first thing that I want us to do is to style this particular div which is holding our button and post form. So right here I'll give it a class name, so we'll say relative, and then I'll have a bg as white, and then rounded is md, padding to be 8 or round, then we'll have a width as full, and we'll have a max hyphen width as 600. So I save, and now we'll have a white background here with a maximum of 600. There we go. Now we have this. If I expand here, it will look something like this, a model. If I click this X, it will close the edit mode. We can open another and close. So as you can see, we are just making use of this is editing to show that pop-up. Now I want this button to be positioned nicely at the end here. To do that, I'll just come to this button, and I'll add a class name, and I'll say absolute. Okay, something is missing here. I think I messed the closing there. Absolute there. Then top will be 3, then right will be 3, and text will be straight 500 or 400, and I save. Now this button will show at the end here, and there we go. Look, now we can close, we can open, we can close. Now the next step is to work on this post form so that it can also handle editing a post. Right now it's only creating a post. The first thing that we will do, we will make it accept some props, a post, and also this button for closing editing, so that after editing we automatically close our pop-up. So we come back to post form. We will allow it to accept two props, a post, and also it will accept handle close editing. We need to add types for this. First of all, our post will be optional. We use a question mark, and it will be of type post, comma. We will have handle close editing. We add the type. It will be optional as well. We don't have to like include it. And then here it will be a function. So we return, like we say that the type is a function. We will import this post, then handle close editing. We missed some spelling somewhere. Handle here. Yeah, there we go. So if I save, you'll see that now post form accepts two props, post and handle editing, which are optional. Okay, So if we pass them, they'll either have something or they'll be undefined. So we come back to our edit post, and right here we will be able to pass a post and handle editing. So first of all, we don't have a post from our edit component, so we need to go to list posts and we'll pass a post right here. We'll say post will be equal to post. So this is the post that we are currently trying to edit. Then we go to our edit post right here. We make sure that we accept the props. So right here I'll say post and we add the type. We'll say post of type post. These will come from Prisma client. Now we have a post now, and we have handle close editing, which will pass to our post form. So right here we pass post as post. We also pass handle close editing as handle close editing. So it's saying this that returns void is not assignable to this that returns an object. So I think here at our post form we should make it return void. I think that should fix it. So I go ahead and save, and here I save. Now in our post form we will be able to have post and handle close editing, and now we can handle editing at our post form. The first thing that we will do is that at our React hook form, where we had use form here, we could have some default values, and after our Zord resolver I'll use a comma and I'll say default values full colon, and we will check. We'll say title. If we have a post, then our default value will be post dot title, else it will be an empty string. So I save, and now interesting, if I click fourth post here, edit, you'll notice that it's out of field with that data because we have this default value of post dot title, the post that we clicked. That post I click, look, it's out of field, and we can continue with the edit, either remove stuff or add stuff. Very nice. Now other things like the title here for our heading, this one, it's saying create post. Since we have a post here in our post form, we could conditionally render the title, and right here we will say if we have a post, then question mark, we will show edit post, else we will show create post. Just like that. I save, and look, edit post now, not create post. Another thing that we could handle, it's the margin top. Since we were making use of CN, I can just include a comma, and I'll say if we have a post, let's remove that, and we'll set the margin to the top to be 0, and I save. And now look, we don't have a lot of white space going on. So if we have a post, we remove that margin, and look, this looks much better. Another thing now is to handle our submit. Okay, since when we submit right now, we will still create a new post. So if we try to edit, let's say poster, I submit, that will not edit our existing post, but it will create a new one. And as you can see, it created a new one. So we want to edit an existing one, and what we will do now, at our on submit right here, we have this already, create post. Now we will just perform a check. We will say if we have a post, so if we have a post, we edit here, else we create a new one. So to edit a post, we just call our server action, which is edit post, and we make sure it's imported from our server action. Did we import it? Edit post, like that. Nice. So all we do, we make a call to it, we pass what it requires. It requires a post and a title. So right here it will require a post and then it will require a title. Now the title is the updated value, and that value will be coming from our data here. So here we'll say that the title will be data.title, just like that. And by doing that, this will automatically update our post. So right here, we can tap the dot then method. We will get data. We will have an arrow function. So if we get data, we have an arrow function. And right here, we can do something with it. We will set the error to be data.error. Just like we were doing here, set success to be data.success. If we have data.success and we have our handle close editing function, we will go ahead right here and we will handle close editing and we will make a call to it. That will set the edit mode to false and it will automatically close our pop-up. After dot, then we will have dot finally, and for this we will just call an arrow function that will set loading to false. So set loading, and this will be false. So I go ahead and save. So as you can see, we just performed a condition of whether we have a post or not. If we have a post, we just make a call to our edit post server action, else we make a call to our create post server action. Let's test this out. We have fourth post. Let's assume this was like the fifth post. So we edit and then we submit. It's submitting, and once it's submitted, we have here fifth post, meaning that our edit functionality is working. Let's try to edit this second post. Instead of second like this, we say second like this, and we submitting. Once it's completed, second post. So as you can see, we have handled all the CRUD operation using Next.js server action. We have worked on some UI stuff in React, created some reusable components, validated form with Zod and React hook form, and so much nice stuff. And with this, I'm sure now you are confident enough to make use of Next.js server action instead of APIs to work on your next big application. And with that, that marks the end of this course. And thanks to Neon for making this course possible. Neon, again, is one of the best places where you can ship faster with Postgres. We have a generous free tier which you can use to test out Neon, and premium packages are also very generous because they offer more storage and even more features. So that marks the end of this course, and I'll see you in the next one.